we jump into the message this morning, I got a few fun facts that I would love to share with you. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to smell the scent of rain or freshly turned up soil? Like, it's so easy that it could have barely rained or had any soil turned up, and all of a sudden you smell it. Or like you're going down the road in the spring or late fall and you smell the fields. Well, as it turns out, the smell of rain and the smell of disturbed soil are both a compound produced by a bacteria called geosmin. I think that's how it's pronounced. And the human nose is extremely sensitive to it. In fact, so sensitive that we can smell it at a low concentration, as low as 5 parts per trillion. Whatever that means. Anyway, but the craziest thing, though, about that is something that relates to sharks. Has anyone ever heard the phrase, blood in the water? Well, because it references when there's blood in the water, it's likely to attract more sharks to it and create more of an issue. Well, as it turns out, we can smell rain and soil better than sharks can smell blood. Mind blowing. The more you know. Anyway, on that note, this morning we're talking about soil. Specifically, we're talking about what grows in soil. I guess something that can be found in soil, technically. And that is roots. We're talking about roots this morning. And I'm sure you're all aware of the importance of roots in soil. The deeper the root, the harder it is for that plant or tree to be uprooted. So the deeper a tree's roots go, the harder it is for that tree to get uprooted when a strong hurricane-force wind comes against it. Now, to shift things ever so slightly to a spiritual connotation, this morning we're talking about the soil of your soul. And specifically speaking, what grows in the soil of your soul. And that's roots. We're talking about roots this morning. And the kind of roots that can develop and grow in the soil of your soul. And as we mentioned, the deeper the root, the harder it is to be uprooted. So then we are deeply rooted in Jesus, the harder it is for the storms of life to uproot us from our foundation. And so since now we've laid the basics of our discussion on roots, it should come as no surprise when I reveal to you in just a short second of what our subject matter is this morning. It's from Hebrews 12:15. And it says this: see that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble. So to mix that into what we've already talked about and established, the deeper the bitter root, the harder it is for it to be uprooted. The deeper down bitterness goes into your soul, the harder it is for it to be removed. And so just for fun, I'm going to share with you real quick our roadmap, if you will, of this morning. We're looking at what these bitter roots are that grow up and cause trouble. We'll look at why you should see that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble, and how to see that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble. So the what, why, and how of seeing no bitter root grows up to cause trouble. So to kick things off with this whole what thing, I want to bring up something that we touched lightly on last week. If by chance you recall, we flirted and teased a bit about this context of being offended. And we talked about last week of the broad and narrow road that Jesus says in Matthew 7. And to rephrase that, it was, enter through the narrow gate of not being offended. For wide is the gate of being offended, and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate of not being offended, and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. And even though there are legitimate times to be offended about something, I feel strongly that there are a lot of times that when we're offended, it's by things that we shouldn't need to be offended by. Last week we talked about the book, The Bait of Satan by John Bevere. And two things we really pulled from that was one, spoiler alert, offense is the bait of Satan. Offense and being offended are the most common tactics Satan uses against us to get us to go down the broad road that leads to destruction. The second thing we talked about was offense is a choice. No one makes us become offended. It's just something we do on our own. And it's an interesting thing because as I mentioned that last week, I found myself this week becoming offended. And to the point where I said, you know what? I am choosing to be offended over this. To make it a ridiculousness of anyway. So, as much you know, I did get over those offenses after I said I'm choosing to get offended. Anyway. So Satan knows that he can get us to bait on choosing to be offended and therefore go through that gate of being offended. He knows he's hooked us, and all he has to do is reel us in. The thing about offense is that most people who are ensnared by it don't even realize it. They don't realize that it's baiting them to go down that broad road of destruction. They just think it's something natural. There's no way that this could be the bait of Satan. This is just how life is. And but what offense does is it imprisons countless Christians, severs relationships, and causes a person to be powerless and miserable. And just in case you haven't connected the dots between the bait of Satan of offense and our topic of bitter roots, it's this. Offense and being offended is a species of bitter root that can, in fact, be planted in the soil of your soul, take root, and cause trouble. And since offense is a choice, you are choosing to plant a bitter root into the soil of your soul. Because it feels so good to be offended. We can feel justified in being offended. Well, this person lied to me. I have every right to be offended against them. Oh, do you? Okay. But the bottom line remains the same. Offense is a choice, and offense is the bait of Satan. It's a bitter root. Hebrews 12:15 again is clear. See that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble. But that's not all. I'm sure you are super curious at what kind of crop is produced by these bitter roots. Fortunately, it's revealed to us in Ephesians 4:31 that some of the fruits are, but are not limited to, rage and anger, fighting and slander, and every form of malice. Not to mention the fruits of the sinful nature that we referenced and talked about last week in Galatians 5. So I don't know if you're aware of it, but these are things that aren't good, that we shouldn't have a part of our lives. And so it's all the more reason to see that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble. So we've established the what. What are bitter roots? What do they look like? But I feel in order to understand it and truly be persuaded to make every effort to not see that a bitter root grows up, we also need to look at the why. Why should you see that no bitter root grows up? Just a rhetorical question. Do you know why? And I don't know if you know this or not, but bitterness can get you to be stupid. Side note on that, I'm sorry, but really I'm not sorry if by chance you were offended by me saying the yes word in church. I just want to remind you that offense is a choice. So you're choosing to be offended by that. Anyway, Bitterness can get you to be stupid, because bitterness is like setting yourself on fire and hope someone else dies of inhalation. Bitterness is like drinking a poison and hoping the other person dies. That is stupid. Bitterness can get you to be stupid. Acting, feeling, believing a certain way, completely convinced that it's having a negative impact on the person it's directed towards. That the person you're bitter about is who's being affected by this poison. When in reality, the only person that's being affected by it is you. When you're offended, it leads to becoming bitter. Or in other words, having unforgiveness. But you're the only one who's burning alive from the flames of your bitterness. The only person who's being destroyed by the poison of unforgiveness. And it can get you to close yourself off from what's healthy and eventually choke out the good that's inside you. Matthew 13, Jesus affirms this when he talks about weeds and thorns from bitter roots that grow up along the good seed. You know, it's the parable of the sower. Sower plants all the seed in the different types of soil. And specifically, Jesus says that as the farmer went out to sow the seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked out the plant. That's what offense and unforgiveness and bitterness does to you. It gets you to close yourself off from what's healthy and eventually choke out the good that's inside you. And that's what it's going to do. The bitterness for us, that's what unforgiveness does. And they will choke out the very life that's in you. All the while, you'll be watching and waiting for that person to have the life choked out of them by your own bitterness. But the reality is it doesn't affect them. It doesn't impact them like it impacts you. The other thing is, while it's a bitter seed planted, it's a rotten, moldy seed that gets planted inside your heart. By allowing bitterness and unforgiveness to take root, it's like allowing a moldy and rotten seed be planted in your heart. Another example of what bitterness in your life does to you, not the other person, not the person you're jealous about or who's hurt you, and so you got some unforgiveness. Your bitterness, your unforgiveness doesn't impact them directly, it impacts you directly. And another reason why you should seed so that no bitter root grows up, because bitterness is like a cancer that eats away at your soul until there's nothing left, until you're a hollow shell of the person you once were. When you let bitterness not only take root, but to grow, and let's be honest, again, it feels so good, it can feel so right to hold on to that bitterness and unforgiveness because of what was done. But like we said earlier, the deeper it's allowed to take root, the more it's allowed to grow inside you, and then the harder it is for it to be removed. Have you ever had this happen to you when you've been mad at someone or angry or anything else like that, and they seem just to carry on completely oblivious to how you're feeling about them and because of them? And then, doesn't it get worse as you just notice and wait for them and nothing is changing? They don't even realize that you're mad at them, and so you just get more and more angry? That's because they haven't drank the poison like you have. They're not even having a clue that you are poisoned by your own bitterness. And if that's happened, you know exactly what it's like to drink poison and hope the other person dies from it. You know exactly what I'm saying when I say bitterness and unforgiveness does far more damage to you than it will ever do to someone else. Here's the thing. You can't be bitter and expect your life to be sweet. You have to see that no bitter root grows up, because bitterness is like a seed, is like setting yourself on fire and hoping the other person dies of inhalation. Thanks, Coop. So what we've covered is the what and the why, but let's just take a little bit of time to discuss the how to see that bitter roots grow up. Now, the best example I can think of is from my own land, at my own house. We bought the house last fall, last October. In the fall, we had this box garden, like it has a 2x4 elevation. And so last fall, we didn't do anything with it. In the spring, we didn't do anything with it. In the summer, we didn't do anything with it. And so if you can imagine, what happened was all these weeds and exotic plants grew up and just ran rampant. And thankfully, last month, Labor Day weekend, I had my parents come up and spend the weekend with us. And together, my dad and I stuck it to this garden, and we got it all tilled out and freshly disturbed, so it was a nice dirt-like smell, and it was beautiful. And my dad did warn me, though, that although we got a lot of it, there's probably some that was still left in there, and I had to make sure to maintain it in order that none of these roots come back up. Well, wouldn't you know it, I didn't maintain it, and things did come back. And before the snow came, it was not as bad shape before we worked it, but still needing something done to it. And how that relates to this whole bitterness root is, again, perhaps you've allowed bitterness or unforgiveness to take root in your heart, and it's gotten out of hand to where your heart was like my box garden, full of weeds and ragged. But perhaps there's been those times where you've done the hard work of tilling the weeds up, you've let go of the bitterness and unforgiveness once or twice. However, it's been a while, and perhaps you thought it was a once and done type thing, but now your heart more resembles what my box garden does now. You've let those things creep back in and take root. So in case you're missing it here, you see to that no bitter root grows up by continuously tilling the soil of your soul. Seeing that no bitter root grows up is something that you have to work at continually. Unless you are secluded from all walks of life and you never talk with anyone, ever. Which, last time I checked, that's no one here. And why I bring that up is because just as we always will have interactions with people, we will always have an opportunity to become offended. We'll have an opportunity to become bitter and allow those roots to take place in our hearts. But check out what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 18, verses 21 and 22. This is the beginning passage of the parable of the unmerciful servant. And what started out is Peter goes to Jesus and asks Jesus, how many times should I forgive someone before who sins against me? Up to 7 times? And Jesus says, no, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. Or other translations, 7 times 70 times. And a little history lesson for you on this. It may not seem like a lot. Ooh, 70 times 7, 490. No big deal. That's less than 500. We could probably all count to that. I mean, Cooper probably couldn't, but he'll get there eventually. But back in the day, first century Israel, 490 was the highest they could count. And so Peter, the other thing is the religious leaders, the Pharisees of the day, they officially said that it's a noble thing to forgive someone 3 times who offends you. But after that, if they offend you a 4th time, you are totally okay to not forgive them and cut them off from your life. So Peter thought he was going to get some points from Jesus because he said a number that was beyond what was accepted as the right standard. But, of course, that's not what happened, because Jesus said 70 times 7. So the moral of the story is that forgiveness is a continual process that never stops. Making the choice to not become offended, a daily process, a continual process that never stops. To kind of reference this to our message on bitterness and bitter roots, Peter basically asked Jesus, how many times do I need to till the soil of my soul to weed out any bitter roots? 7 times? And Jesus says, no, Peter, you dummy. Okay, you didn't say dummy, but not 7 times, but see to it that no bitter root grows up in your soul by tilling your soul 7 times, 70 times. So, which Peter, again, if you call, is the highest number. So basically I'm telling you, Peter, never stop tilling the soil of your soul in order to see that no bitter root grows up. I mean, if you go to Matthew 18, Jesus literally does not say those words, but it's what we can gather what he's meaning to say when he says, always be forgiving those who sin against you. So see to it that no bitter root grows up by tilling the soil of your soul. Because bitterness is like drinking poison and hoping the other person dies. So perhaps you've been with us this entire time through this roadmap of a sermon and a message, and you've seen the what, you've seen the why, you've seen the how. But what's this final application we're looking at? Maybe you're not entirely sure how it exactly plays out. I did touch on Ephesians 4:31, but let's go back there to just really see how to see no bitter root grows up. Paul says, Ephesians 4:31 and 32, get rid of all bitterness, rage, anger, brawling, and slander, along with every form of hatred. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you. See to it that no bitter root grows up by getting rid of all the bitterness, by getting rid of all the rage and anger, by getting rid of the fighting and the slander, and by getting rid of every form of hatred. See to it that no bitter root grows up by being kind and compassionate, by forgiving each other just as God, through our relationship with Jesus, forgave us. So, we've talked obviously about how bitterness is a poison. And in case you didn't catch it, the antidote is forgiveness. Bitterness is a poison, and the antidote is forgiveness. When you notice bitterness creeping up, take care of it. Don't delay. When you're given an opportunity to become offended by someone, don't take it. When you're tempted to not forgive someone, forgive them anyway. It's something that we need to work on right now. It's a daily basis. It's not just a one and done type of thing. So I want to share with you a challenging quote that I heard last month when I was at a meeting. Your joy cannot be taken from you. It's yours to relinquish. Your joy cannot be taken from you. It's yours to relinquish. No person, no situation can rob or steal your joy. Your joy is yours to give up by choice. When you drink the poison of bitterness, your joy is yours to give up by choice when you choose to become offended. By choosing to become bitter, you are trading in your joy for it. Just as it's impossible for oil and water to mix, it's impossible for joyfulness and bitterness to mix. When you're choosing to pick up an offense, you're willfully putting down your joy for it. Because you can't hold on to your joy and also hold on to your bitterness and an offense. Again, you can't be bitter and expect your life to be sweet. Here's how I want to close things out this morning. By giving you an opportunity to receive the antidote to the poison of bitterness. Here's a tough reality. An unhealed person, a person with bitter roots, can find offense in pretty much anything someone does. But a healed person who has tilled the soil of their souls and saw to it that no bitter root grew up, understands that the actions of others has nothing to do with them. So which one will you be? Healed or unhealed? Offended easily? Not offended easily? Bitter or joyful? Each day you have the choice. Right now, you have the choice. The Lord is wanting to help free you from the poisonous chokehold bitterness has had over your life. If forgiveness is the antidote to the bitterness poison, then what's needing to take place and happen is for forgiveness to be there. Forgiveness is what's needed to replace the bitterness with joy. It's forgiveness for yourself, for letting someone else have your joy because you're bitter. It's forgiveness for others, for the reason why you let bitter roots grow. And so whether you realize it or not, that bitter roots are there, in the remaining time this morning, and even once Emily comes up to play our closing song, it's an opportunity to just take that personal inventory of your life and deal with it between you and the Lord, and till the soil of your soul to remove those bitter roots. Just like my dad and I did in my box garden. So as we sing, take this time to talk to the Lord and ask Him to remove that bitterness or offense that's been planted. To forgive from your heart any person that's needing it. Again, this isn't a one and done thing. Today, you're doing the hard thing of tilling the soil of your soul and uprooting those bitter roots. But you will need to maintain the soil of your soul. You'll need to see on a daily basis that no bitter root grows up. That person you forgive, you're probably going to have to forgive them again. You're going to need to keep forgiving them because bitter roots are going to want to rise up. And not only that, but there'll be other people that will probably come into your life that will offend you, that will do something wrong, and you'll need to make a choice to not become offended and to forgive them. You must, on a daily basis, see that you don't let any bitter root grow up by choosing to not be offended, by choosing to forgive, choosing to not be bitter. Because bitterness is like drinking poison and hoping the other person dies.